my mate Anton from Pentagram and Criminal is here from Chile, and he's going to tell us what, for a start, is happening outside the, what shall we call it, the blast zone of the first world. How are things down there in South America?
Hey man, things are apparent. I mean, there's been a very constant number of new infections for the last 3 months or something. Always, every day in Chile, between 1,000 and 2,000, always in that range, you know. And now it's kind of going up. It just went over 2,000 yesterday, and the government is warning we are entering the second wave and so on. And they imposed, I mean, we were pretty much opened up already, and now they're imposing some new restrictions again, but it's all very I don't know how much sense it makes, you know, because you can't go out on a weekend, but during the week you can go to a bar and you can go to a mall, you know. So I don't really know if that, I mean, what's the point? Same thing with the curfew, you know. So curfew from midnight to 5 a.m. So I don't think there's a lot of people about at that time anyway, and people don't respect it anyway. I mean, there's another whole thing with been a crisis of authority in Chile for some time. You know, if you heard about the uprising in October of last year, yeah. You know, it keeps going. You know, it's there, it's latent, and it's just waiting to explode again. You know, and part of the reason that people don't listen to the government is A, because they think they're incompetent, and B, because they don't trust them.
Yeah, but I mean, don't you think that's probably true? I mean, one of the things I've found, for example, here in Ireland, is that people are so docile. They've accepted more or less all of this. Even if you present to people like, hey, you know, some of this science is not based, it's not based in science. It's not even based in any rationality. It just seems to be politicians randomly making things up on the fly. People just sort of very, very placidly kind of went, look, we just have to get through it, accept it. I think maybe if the government had a little threat of danger to their proceedings, maybe might keep them in line a bit more, because it strikes me that a country like Ireland, you know, it's almost like the perfect testing ground for a sort of docile response to authority, this sort of strange quasi, is it authoritarianism, is it a health crisis, which is it, you know?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm at least in the beginning, I was quite happy. Well, I lived the first few months of the pandemic down in Spain, and I was quite impressed actually by the response of how disciplined people actually were. You know,
the first lockdown, yeah, definitely, yeah.
But and then again, I mean, the authorities we have, they might be good or bad, but it's the ones we elected in a way. So
sure,
they have the power of decision in this kind of matter. But yeah, you are definitely right that we should question things, and I think that as I just said, you know, and that goes for Spain as well. A lot of it just doesn't hold water. It's just not watertight, you know, what they're presenting as science, you know.
Yeah, I mean the you know, even the cases, when you say to people, you know, there was a moment a couple of months ago in Ireland where the newspapers have stopped reporting cases. It's like as if life is just normal now. They've just gone back to stupid stories about Christmas and people drinking too much and just nonsense. But a couple of months ago, maybe 2 months ago, there was just cases in the front of the newspaper. And then when you actually looked at the stats, there was 37 people in ICU in the whole country, 37. And so cases, to me, cases are cases. The only thing that matters is actually critical admissions and deaths. Yeah. And on those terms, it would seem that what's happening is within the envelope of a normal year in the world, which is 70 million deaths, roughly.
I agree with you that the hospital capabilities and deaths are the thing we should measure, the important thing. But I think well, that might be Ireland's case, but I think the rest of Europe, Spain, France, and so on, it is close to very critical in
Mm.
terms of, you know, intensive care units and stuff like that, you know.
Sure.
But what more are they going to do than they already have done? You know,
Yeah.
it's just, on the one hand, you go like, oh, you can't blame people because it's the government's fault. But on the other hand, you can blame people, because if people just get together, take off their masks and start drinking and start talking to each other at less than a meter distance, you know, and you know, you can literally see the virus flying out of their mouths, you know, then, well, you can't blame the government for that, can you?
No, but at the same time, I can blame them for, well, I mean, to me, you know, there is a health crisis, but it's intermingled with a very great and serious threat to civil liberty and freedom. And I think in the fullness of time, I'm on the side that maybe could be more important. Maybe not more important, but have more gravity than people think right now. And like I said it to a friend today, if you can tell me a moment in history where the citizens of any nation state or city handed all of their freedoms to the institutions of power and got them back in one piece, then I'd like to know it, because I don't think it exists. And
I don't know, man, because I mean, I obviously have the parallel when with the Pinochet dictatorship, but that's, people didn't resign their rights, so just got it taken away.
okay,
So that's a big difference, you know.
well,
In this case, we're talking about people voluntarily saying, yes, okay, I'm fine with that. I won't go out at night, or whatever. I won't meet my grandma, you know.
sure. I agree with you, but I mean, I'm not for a moment saying this is like this sort of implementation of a hard dictatorship. But at the same time, you know, what matter if it be a zebra or a horse, as they say in the Middle East, if it looks the same as a silhouette, in the sense that whether you've handed over your rights or had them taken, if they don't come back to you, you're still left in a position where you're, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about, was also, that's my kind of soft segue into discussing all those things in the past, you know. But at the same time, the problem I have with this is, of course, I'm sure people on the podcast are sick of hearing me talk about it, but is that it looks like so many different things at the same time. In that, yes, it looks like a botched response by a broken system, by politicians who are incompetent and afraid of their own personal jeopardy. Now, that is very true. But on the other hand, it also, you could say, does this have the potential to be manipulated by institutions of power, multinationals, technocratic elites, in order to digitally implement new structures of conformity in society? I think that could also very well be true.
I think that's already in place, though. I mean, if you've seen a few documentaries on Netflix and stuff, you know, about the great hack and stuff like that, and how people are actually already manipulating elections and stuff like that, you know, through social media, which apparently is very, very easy. You know, you just have to target the right groups, you know, and it's not that many people that you actually need to convince of something. And convincing them isn't very hard either, you know. So I think that's already in place. That's we are already living that kind of control between under social media. But this is a whole new game now.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but I will say, people will say to me, "Oh, Alan, were we ever free?" And I go, "Well, yes, we were." Because right now we're living in an open prison where we have no freedom of travel and movement. And so there have always been checks and balances on your freedom. But the idea that you could, as we have done, somehow make a career of decades as a musician, to greater or lesser degrees, travel the world, play this, that, and the other, you have essentially lived a form of personal sovereignty and freedom. But what might happen through this, like, for example, if Ireland, say, or most countries remain in 2, 3, 4, 5, a cycle of lockdown that never really seems to end, then there are huge new checks and balances on your freedom of movement. I can't just fly to Chile. You can't just fly to Ireland. You're kind of stuck where you are. And that remote living future is a new addition to what you're talking about. So I kind of say yes and no, in the sense that I get it, that we will always have all these, you know, implements of control on our personal sovereignty. But this stuff seems, this could be new elements, especially for the first world where people are used to being able to travel and move to wherever they want to, and you know, that kind of stuff. Well, at the whole
Yeah,
world,
but
really, you know.
yeah, but I just want to quickly remind you of the. It was a few years ago. There was this volcanic eruption over in Iceland,
Yeah, yeah.
and the cloud filled the European airspace, and all the flights were grounded. And that kind of already gave you an idea of how fragile this whole system we have actually is.
It's it's a good point. Yeah, yeah.
So I don't think it takes that much to disrupt this seeming normality, you know, of just, oh yeah, I'll just jump on a plane and fly to Russia or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I mean, that's not. I mean, I'm just picking that as one thing, but I'm also kind of saying that maybe, you know, it's tied in with other things like universal basic income, what that represents to society. The idea that, for example, I was being flippant with my friend, and I said, you know, you don't dance with a stranger till you're at zero. I was actually singing George Michael, but you know, I'm not going to made that joke twice. But even within your own city, that there's no art, no comedy, no theater, no music, nothing like this, no freedom of expression that isn't mandated by the state, is also something that I think no one is really discussing. I mean, I get barely any coverage on mainstream media, the fact that there is no level of personal expression in this. Well, and that sort of worries me as well. How is it down there in Chile? Is there
it's the same thing. It's the same thing. I mean, it's all, you know, it's all just shut down. There were very timid attempts to start doing things again. I actually had a Pentagram show scheduled for this Friday, this coming Friday, where we're going to do the social distancing thing, you know. People were going to be sat at tables, you know, apart from each other and stuff, you know. But then this happened, you know, the restrictions were reimposed and we had to cancel it, you know. But talking a bit more about the bigger picture, I think what it goes to show is that for most governments, art and culture is just not important. It's just not a factor, you know. It just doesn't matter. And even if it's in some countries, it's a multi-million-dollar industry, they just don't seem to care, you know. And it's always the last on the list, you know. They think about the restaurants and the bars first before they think about and even those they don't think about very much, you know. But
no.
They're definitely not thinking about the artists, you know, and people who actually give society a soul, you know. It's just not important because they're just technocrats, you know, and they're just interested in their own benefit and to win the next election. It's basically it, I think.
I agree with you, and it's been very striking to me that how little art means. I mean, even during the summer when the weather was okay, there was no even attempt at, okay, let's give the public a free open air show, even if it was distanced, to just give them something, or maybe, you know, comedy on the stoop to some people gathered in a garden. Nothing. No one stood on a stage for 9 months, and I don't think anybody's going to stand on a stage properly for at least another 5 or 6, maybe. Because like I said, unless you go back to zero, the kind of gigs we were used to, they don't happen anymore. You know, and that's, I think you're totally right that it's just, again, it's a sort of bureaucratic, technocratic elite making decisions sort of on the fly.
I mean, the level of incompetence and just I would almost say literacy of most politicians, be it in South America or in Europe, it's indistinct, you know. It's frightening, you know. It's just really a bad level. I mean, I don't know, maybe politicians were always the same, but at least a few decades ago they could write a speech that would move people, you know, and now it's just Twitter and fucking, you know, and just having a jab at the other one, you know. And it's like, wow, we stoop to a very low level, I think, in politics, man.
But do you feel that now in Chile there is a climate where the government treads more carefully because of what happened a couple of years ago? Maybe people don't know, but there was big sort of, how would you describe what happened in Chile 2 or 3 years ago?
It was last year. It was it culminated on the 18th of October of last year. This all started with students who said we won't pay because the metro fare, the underground train fare went up. You know, the ticket went up like 30 pesos, which is not a lot of money. But students said we won't be paying, and they started jumping over the tourniquet.
Sure,
you know,
yeah.
And from that, it was just a landslide, and no one really knows exactly what happened, because on one day it was like 30 metro stations that were burnt down, you know. And I mean, you've been to a metro station, you know. I mean, what is there to burn, you know? So that must have been, there must have been something very well planned and executed to actually manage to make a metro station burn, you know. But it all went out into the streets, and there were, I have to say, there were very big peaceful protests, you know. There were, at one point, there were over 1 million people in the streets gathered to protest the government. But then there was looting, you know, and the response from the police was very brutal. A lot of people lost their eyesight. People died, you know. Yeah. People were raped in custody, you know, and it's just it just turned very, very ugly, you know. Yeah. And all that has kind of calmed down because the government agreed to a referendum to decide whether we would write a new constitution. And that referendum just happened a few weeks ago, and it was overwhelmingly yes towards a new constitution. Okay. But now we are in a position where there's something like 5 or 6 elections within the next year. You know, there's like local politicians, then there's a presidential election, there's primaries first, you know, and then meanwhile, the new constitution is being drafted, and that new constitution, once the draft is approved by the constitutional convention, it has to be confirmed by another referendum, and that is going to be like 2 years from now. Okay. So we are facing a period of potential instability, which is quite a challenge, I would say. The government is treading very carefully right now. Their approval ratings are at historical minimum, like 10% or something like that of approval. Okay. You know, and they're just basically waiting it out until it goes. And the whole pandemic scenario obviously isn't helping. You know, there was a congressional proposal a few months ago that people could withdraw 10% of their pension savings in order to bridge, you know, the pandemic. Okay. And that kind of tied in with a whole rhetoric that's been going on for a long time, that actually because Chile is one of the few countries in the world, if not the only one, where the pension system is entirely in private hands. It's not run by the state. It's all private companies that run, but you have to pay in. I mean, it's not your choice to pay in or not. You know, you can just choose which one of these companies you use. You know, that's all. So that's one of the biggest or one of the very big issues that have been protested, and that led to the uprising last year, among many others. You know, healthcare and so many other things. You know, so this. When this was approved, that people could withdraw money, it was seen as a crack in the system. You know, it's starting to crumble. You know, okay. Now they've approved it for a second time. People again can withdraw another 10% of their savings. You know, and so it goes until people will be left with no savings at all. You know, sure, yeah. And I'm not saying the system is good, because there's certainly very big flaws to it, but I think it's even worse to people just spending because I mean, a lot of people really need that money to just buy food or pay the rent. Yeah. But it's been known there's a lot of people who just bought plasma TVs or drugs, you know, with the fucking money, you know. So I know it because my dealer was very busy.
Yeah. I mean, for people who don't know, your journey within all of this is I think is really fascinating. We've talked about this a lot over the years that we've known each other, that your family came from Europe to South America, and you grew up in South America sort of like as the blonde-haired sort of white kid who then started the
Yeah.
metal band under a dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who kind of don't know the story, I mean, maybe we should fill in the blanks, and as always, I've got loads of questions about that kind of thing. But you ended up being like you started Pentagram in, what was it, 86 or something like this?
85.
85.
Actually, on the 28th of December, it's going to be the 35th anniversary of the first Pentagram show ever.
Wow.
It's a lot of time.
Yeah. But back
That's how
then,
old I am.
that's
Sorry.
insane. No, that's insane. Like, because back then, obviously, so what was it like growing up as like the kind of the blondie European white kid with the sort of the German surname, growing up in South America in the 80s like that?
Well, I went to a German school, so a lot of my schoolmates were the same sort of appearance as myself, you
Sure.
know.
Yeah.
So there it wasn't, but out on the streets it was very obvious that you were the strange bird. I remember one thing very clearly. I was on the bus, riding the bus back home from school one day, and I was sitting at the window minding my own business, you know, and I see outside on the street, I see the small street kid, like barefoot, you know, one of those kids that you see begging on the streets and stuff like that. And he just looked at me and just spat at the window where I was sitting.
Yeah.
And that pretty much tells you everything you need to know.
All right.
You know, because when you are fairly well off, my parents weren't rich. My dad was a very hard worker, you know. My mom went to school, became a psychologist, you know, and they both worked very hard, and we had a good life, you know. But we weren't rich by any means, you know. But other people, they see you, they say, oh, you're blonde, you have a European or German last name. You must be rich, you must be loaded, you know. And that is a prejudice that followed me into the metal scene, because when we started playing and stuff, it was always, oh, these guys, they're rich and they're right wing, they're fascists and this and that, and without anyone ever really talking to me and asking me what my life was like, you know.
Was that because, I mean, were like all the guys in Pentagram from the same sort of social class then as you, or were they being Chileans as well? Or like, how did they perceive the band like that?
Well, the other guys were in kind of the, socially speaking, they were from the same sort of class, if you wish.
Yeah.
One of them had a Jewish last name, the drummer, and the other guy had a Spanish last name, but a German second last name, you know. So we were from that sort of crowd, you know.
Yeah.
And but that's not to say that the other bands, you know, they were a lot. There were a lot of French or German last names as well, you know. So it's I don't know. It's maybe it was just my my very blonde, very big, very blonde, very big hair that really caught the attention of people. You know? Yeah, I mean, people who are not familiar probably can't imagine, but I had like almost like an afro, you know, like very, 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 very white, you know. So it was very striking visually.
And because you were sort of growing up kind of, let's say, on the outside of, I suppose, not regular, you were different within Chilean culture. Were people then associating you somehow subconsciously with the regime or something like that? Like, how was it to be a teenager and under basically a dictatorship? Like, what would, when you look back now, I don't know. It's a complicated question. I'm trying to.
I mean, I think there's two parts to your question. One thing is how people perceived us, and as I said, some people just jumped to the conclusion that we were right wing and fascist, and that we supported Pinochet and so on, which couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah,
I had it also that there was a review of one of our first tapes in a German fanzine called Battlefield. And the guy wrote, these guys live in Chile, but they have German last names and they can afford instruments, so they must support the regime and they must be fascists. you
Wow.
know, without ever checking anything with us, or, you know.
Yeah.
And I became friends with one of the guys just in the recent years, you know, and he kind of sort of apologized, you know, we were idealists and stuff like that. But it's a typical thing where people let their ideals go ahead of their thinking, you know.
Yeah.
And the second part of your question, I think, is what it was like to be a teenager and under a dictatorship. Well, the thing is, there was a curfew for a long time, and people really would respect the curfew, because if you went out during the curfew, you were risking being shot, which is not the case nowadays. Maybe in some parts of the city, but in a big part of it, it's not. People just still go out, you know.
Sure.
You were afraid, really afraid of the police, you know, and of the military. And we still did our shows, you know. We still played our shows. We put on shows. We just posted flyers on the light posts and on the walls and stuff like that. And we do, and they started getting really big by '87. You know, there were like 2,000 kids inside like a basketball arena, and but with no security, and it was very chaotic. It was great, but it was chaotic at the same time, you know. The equipment was very rudimentary, you know. And it was like every band, I mean, we have a guitar amp, but we put the drums, you know, and then you just put together a backline like that, you know. And the PA people, they wouldn't dare put the soundboard in the crowd, so they put it on stage, because they thought it was going to get trashed, you know. So, and obviously they couldn't hear anything, you know, and the sound was awful out front, you know. But and no security, people diving off the stage, you know, the broken bones and shit, you know. No one died, I'm surprised, you know. But well, someone died at a show in Valparaiso, which is the coast, like the port, the
on the
coastal
coast.
town. Someone died there, but altogether, I'm quite surprised that it went without any major incidents.
And was there
but
a moment?
There
was there a moment when the authorities began to notice what you were doing?
Well, they just showed up and shut down the shows, you know. And on the way out, they were just beating kids with the fucking sticks, you know. That was it, you know. Well, one of the smaller shows we played in '87, they just drove up with buses, and they just loaded the whole audience, the whole crowd into the buses and took him away, you know. It was pretty scary, man. But at the same time, there was tensions within the scene as well, you know. Between bands, there was a lot of jealousy and shit talking and stuff like that. And then you had the other component that there were a lot of people who were really compromised with the scene and the music, but there were other people who just went there to just go crazy, you know. And parts of going crazy was spitting at the bands. And it was not like the odd guy spitting, it was the whole crowd spitting all the time. You know, so it was pretty disgusting. And I think a lot of bands, and I include myself, I was close to just giving it up, you know, and saying, fuck this, you know, I'm not going to go on stage to be spat on, you know.
And were you able to, I mean, were you able to then go across borders and play in other countries back then, or was that allowed? No?
It was allowed, but Pentagram never managed for some reason. I know a couple other bands did. Necrosis did shows in Brazil, and they actually, I think they recorded their album. No, they recorded it in Chile, but it was released in Brazil. And Massacre, it's probably the earliest Chilean extreme metal band. They went to Brazil too. So you could do it. It was I went, but not as a band. I went as an individual. I went to see the Cavalera guys in Belo Horizonte. That was February '87.
All right.
And it was a 3-day and 3-night bus ride to fucking Brazil.
Wow.
And not in a bunk, you know. Just sat on a normal bus seat, you know. But it was worth it, you know. I saw a lot of things over there that opened my eyes, you know. The scene in Brazil was much more evolved, you know. They had labels, they had magazines, you know. I mean, quality-wise, well, you either love it or hate it, but bands like Sarcophago and Chacal and all those, you know, they're very, very primitive, you know, but they had their charm, you know. And we maybe thought of ourselves as a bit more technical and whatever, you know, which we
Yeah.
probably were,
Yeah.
you know, but yeah, it was quite impressive. And I spent like 2 weeks at the Cavalera home.
Wow.
And they played a couple shows, you know, we went to rehearse from other bands, you know, and it was interesting, man. It was a very cool experience.
Yeah, those records and cassettes, to find a good tape trader when you were in Europe in the, say, 88 to 91 was like gold dust. Somebody that would actually trade you the thing and it would arrive in the post, because things would always go missing. So actually being able to get a hold of INRI or Chacal or Dorsal Atlantica was really, this was kind of mythological that you can manage to find that. And I had one great tape trader, and I used to get all, you know, MX and, you know, the Mist and all this kind of stuff as well. As well as all the usual stuff. But yeah, that moment when you picked up the Shark Records version of Schizophrenia in the shop, like, oh fuck, they have this, because you've been hearing about it for a year, but you couldn't get a single copy of it, you know. So the South American scene had this kind of mythology around it that sort of fascinated everyone.
I always thought, I mean, I can't really imagine it from that side of the fence, you know, because for us, you know, the US and Europe were always, oh, it's great, they make records, you know, they tour, they have festivals and stuff like that, you know, even back then. And for us, it was, this is all shit, you know, and it's crap. And then I get to, I don't know, later I spoke to Tompa, for example, from At the Gates, you know, and he was so into Chacal and fucking Sarcophago and stuff like that. I'm like, really? I couldn't believe it, you know?
Yeah. Like, well, the tapes were like gold dust. And I mean, what was happening in South America in terms of those bands was far, far ahead of what was happening in Ireland. Like, people often ask me, hey, does Ireland have some cool 80s cult with a K demo that I've never heard? And I go, no, it doesn't. There was a couple of really bad thrash bands and some awful heavy metal bands, but there wasn't anything happening here. And I remember seeing Sepultura in '90 for Beneath Their Mains, and it would have been over 1,000 people there, which was a lot back then, maybe 1,100, 1,200,000, and people went absolutely ballistic. But in a way, people loved Sepultura so much because Irish people had sort of taken them in as their own. They'd kind of gone, these guys are on the outside, they're from a poor country, like we felt. So people sort of kind of rooted for them. It was weird.
Yeah, they were the underdogs, you know.
Yeah,
I know.
Does that make sense, that a miserable, kind of grey, rainy, dull country, you know, kind of weather-wise like Ireland would somehow adopt these exotic bands and decide, yeah, these are the ones we're rooting for?
I guess it does. I mean, it still happens nowadays. It surprised me. You know, I play in Brujeria as well, you know. Which is like a cult band, you know, but it's all the lyrics are all in Spanish, you know, and the subjects we talk about, they're all, you know, the immigration and the drugs and stuff like that, you know, very, very, you know, Latin problems, you know. And then you go to a place like Czech Republic and people go absolutely insane. And I kind of, it's complicated for me to find the connection there, but I guess it's because of something like what you're saying, you know, they feel like the underdogs, they feel like the left out, you know, those posh Europeans, you know, Germans and Swedes, whatever, you know, and we are the underdogs, you know, of Europe, and then it kind of makes sense, I guess.
I think somehow it does, and I think what it shows is that the sort of interesting transcendence culturally of these things to cross borders within the heavy metal scene that people outside the heavy metal scene don't understand. People who don't understand heavy metal would often, you know, sort of peripherally or, you know, well, out of ignorance, portray elements of it as being racist or this or that or the other. But actuality is that the underground throughout all of those decades sustained itself on this kind of you know, sort of ecosystem that crossed cultural boundaries, that anybody who came from that era never saw any of those things on those terms. And therefore, like, it always fascinated me, exactly as you say, that how a poor Eastern European country would find kinship with, like, oh, we got to go and see this band, they're from Peru,
Mexico,
or Bolivia, or Mexico, or whatever. Which is a kind of very beautiful thing, and it makes a kind of mockery of some of the I suppose, ignorant, I think, views of what heavy metal represents as being just kind of like a middle-class white man's game, because it certainly isn't, you know?
Well, it is and it isn't. I think if
Well, maybe I didn't frame that
you've probably
correctly.
seen Heavy
Maybe
Metal Parking Lot.
yeah, okay. Well, maybe I didn't frame that correctly. I suppose I was thinking more about the underground and where we came from.
Okay. Because but just to make my point, you know,
Sure.
Heavy Metal Parking Lot, if people haven't seen it, it's a short documentary which was shot in the parking lot of a arena that was hosting a Judas Priest concert.
Sure,
And you can see the kind of, but it's white people, but it's not upper class white people. It's white trash.
Working
it's totally
class
white
people.
trash, you know?
Working
And
class
that's where it all came from. I mean, you can probably, in their beginnings, all the bands fucking Exodus and Metallica, and they were all white trash, probably, you know?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's where it came from. And that's why it probably appealed so much to South Americans as well, you know? So, oh, these guys, they're gringos, but they're not like the polished, you know, big sounding gringos. They mean it, you know, they're brutal, you know, they're evil. And that's how it got there, and it became more extreme even in South America, you know, and it was vomited back to the first world, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm fascinated though to just go back to the politics a bit, like the sort of political soul or upheaval that South America represents, also kind of fascinates me. And I think about, all right, well, I did a paper on this about how in the North Americas, if you were, well, I read a book and wrote a paper on it, but the North Americas, if you think about it, had far less natural resources than the South Americas, right? But the North Americas, through, I suppose, Protestantism and the ability to own land and be elected to governance, sort of separated their path from the South Americas, which had Catholicism, and I suppose kept its sort of feudal system, which kept the people sort of in their place as their Spanish or Portuguese overlords, colonial overlords, sort of still owned the same valley or area for hundreds and hundreds of years. And somehow it seems to be maybe I'm simplifying it, but a sort of Protestant North, Catholic South, Latin Northern divide. And the sort of the South Americas on those terms was always kind of damned to political chaos, or is that too far wide of the mark?
I mean, I think you can probably establish a parallel with Europe itself, you know, because the North is Protestant, you know, and more austere, you know, historically at least. Times are changing, but it's like that. And the southern countries, Spain, Italy, Portugal, you know, Greece, they're all more Catholic, and it's a different ethic, you know, it's different ethics, you know.
Yeah, obedience through poverty.
Yeah, something like that. And I don't know. I mean, it's like in Catholicism, it seems to me like, oh, you sinned, you committed a sin, then you apologize and you pray a little bit, and then it's all good, you know. Yeah. Whereas the Protestants, they carry the burden of their guilt forever, you know. It's kind of a little bit like that, you know. It's we're probably oversimplifying. It's probably a very complex topic to tackle it within a few minutes, you know. But I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying, you know. And that's probably why also in South America was a breeding ground for the more radical ideas, you know, for the more revolutionary left-wing ideas, you know, because I mean, it's just a matter of looking around, going to the shanty towns of the favelas and so on. People have rights to be pissed off, you know, and if someone says to them, "Oh, we take the weapons and we'll get in charge of this," well, yeah, I understand that people want to follow that path sometimes, you know. Problem is, when there's another elite in power, it's still an elite, you know, and also, I mean, I'm going a little deep now, maybe, but I don't think the work ethic in South America allows for a socialist system where everything is owned by everyone and we all work towards the same goal, because some of them will work and some others won't, you know.
Yeah.
And I always say, I mean, I'm not a big fan of communism, I have to be honest, you know, and
Yeah.
if it didn't work in Germany, is it really going to work in Chile?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I guess not.
Sorry.
No. It fascinates me because I've always been kind of fascinated by South American political culture. And like I sort of studied a bit of Pinochet and, you know, all the sort of, I suppose, the other crypto fascist dictators who were sort of, well, in that period, I suppose, were sort of propped up by the CIA or that kind of thing, you know?
Absolutely. And they always took advantage of this, of the divide. I mean, South America could have been the United States of South America if Bolivar, that one of the big liberators, had his say, you know, but it didn't, you know, and all the viceroys, you know, they all wanted their own little parcel, you know, and that's how South American nationalism was born. And in a weird way, it connects with football mentality, you know, and that we are great and we are the best and the other guys are cunts, basically, you know, and they deserve to be beaten, you know. And it goes as far as, you know, I know I'm making very big jumps here sometimes, but it's just what comes to my mind, you know. But sometimes from the hooligans, you know, the football crowds, you get like really insulting, offensive chants, you know, towards, for example, towards Argentina. Oh, you lost the Falklands because you're cunts, you know, and whatever that that kind of thing, you know. It's like, really, I mean, we should be, you know. I don't have that kind of mentality. I have friends in Peru and Argentina and everywhere. I've managed to travel, and I've seen that people basically are the same everywhere, you know, and especially within South America. So I think we should like unite and not have this artificial division. But that's one thing the proto-dictators, how you say, they exploited that. They exploited that feeling of nationalism, and it's all like shitty little countries that can barely fucking scratch their own backs, you know. But they still think they're the best in the world, you know. It's weird, man.
So how did that manifest itself, like under Pinochet then in the 80s when you were growing up?
Well, we were very close to going to war with Argentina over some little islands very down south. And all of a sudden you had in the schools, you were taught about these islands that no one really knew existed, you know. And there was a whole rhetoric that was fed to the public. You have to remember back then, there was really no free press or anything, you know. So the news, they had to broadcast what the regime wanted, you know. And it was all like, yeah, Chile is great, and flags and beautiful valleys, you know. And I remember one day, I took my bike to the petrol station, you know, to blow up the tires.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know how to do it, you know. So I asked the guy at the petrol station how to do it, and he said, how are we going to fight the Argentinians if you even don't even know how to do that, you know? I'm like, whoa. Jesus, man.
It's filtered down into every part of the consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. And people thought Argentinians were cunts and we have to kill them, you know. And that's what they do, you know. And I bet it was the same on the other side. I mean, I think the Falklands War was mainly started to divert attention from the big economic crisis and from the human rights problems that were actually much bigger in Argentina than here. Human rights violations in Argentina were massive and brutal, man. I'm not saying they weren't in Chile, they were too. But just numbers wise, it was like tenfold in Argentina, you know.
Yeah, what do they call them? The disappeared or whatever, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, Thatcher started, I suppose, the Falklands War as well, to kind of the idea that war is always good for the economy and it would distract from, I suppose, the economic troubles that were happening in the UK at the time. Because most people don't realize that the 1970s in the UK was a time of you know, riots and strikes all the time, and the IMF were there in the 70s, and
the coal miners and all that.
yeah, that was just around the corner. Yeah, 82, 83. So it was almost like a sort of smoke and mirrors thing politically.
Yeah, well, we know that. I mean, people people in power, they use war to benefit their own agenda, isn't it? You know, they never go to war themselves. They're not going to send their kids to war, are they?
But then you left. Oh, so then you left Chile sometime in the 90s to come to Europe, right?
No, I actually left in 2001.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
So you were in Chile when Pinochet was deposed.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
That was the first time I went to vote. I voted no to Pinochet.
Really?
Because there was a referendum. There was a referendum. First, there was a referendum in 1980. I was too young to vote. And that referendum was totally rigged. And that was the referendum where the current constitution was approved. You know, and that referendum had a provisional thing that in 1988 there would be another referendum to vote whether Pinochet would remain in power or would be ousted. You know, and that was the first. That was the first kind of free election there was. You know, and there was actually TV ads were allowed for both sides. You know, and that's. And actually, I think the TV ads were what won over the people, because all of a sudden you were seeing people you knew from the television, like actors and presenters and newsreaders and stuff like that, coming out and saying, we have to vote this guy out, you know? Yeah. And people are dying and so on. And the no option won. That was the first time I voted.
and now, is that actually what moved him out of power, a democratic vote in the end? It just took almost 2 decades to kind of roll around to becoming on the statute books, or how did it work?
Well, there's a lot of rumors about that election night. It is said that because they started delaying the results. You know, there should have been results at like 8 or 10 p.m. or something like that, you know, and there was nothing. There was just giving partial results, all always in favor of Pinochet. And you could kind of sense that something was brewing. And they say that the military went to the presidential palace and told Pinochet, we're here and we're ready to take over the country and fuck this fucking referendum, you know? Yeah. And legend has it that one of the generals, because there was a junta, right?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
And one of the generals, the Air Force general, said, I'm not participating in this, you know, so this is not going to happen. And that's what actually stopped, you know, them for doing how do you say it?
A coup.
But a self coup, an auto coup, or something like that.
Okay.
There's a word for it in Spanish. It's auto golpe. Okay. It's like when you are in government, but you do a coup to remain in government. You know?
All right, like a sort of a purge, an internal purge, or something. I don't know.
Something like that. And legend has it that is what stopped it. You know, but then the constitution that was in place had a lot of restrictions. You know, there were a number of senators that were designated by the military and stuff like that. You know, even Pinochet was allowed to be a senator just because he had been the dictator, you know, and stuff like that, which little by little, through successive referendums and stuff, was kind of made. Yeah, it was kind of cleaned, and it was made into a more normal constitution, you know. It probably bears little resemblance to what it was at the beginning, even though the basic principles are still the same. And that's what people don't want, you know. They want we jump into the present now. People, what they want is, they want a clean slate. They want to start from scratch. They want to have there's actually going to be in the constitutional convention, there's going to be half women and half men for the first time. There's going to be a part for indigenous peoples, because there's like several different indigenous peoples, and the Mapuche and the Rapa Nui and the Aymara and so on. And they're gonna have a quota to bring forth their ideas, you know. So at the moment, it looks like it's working, you know, that we're gonna have a serious discussion. But I'm missing the serious discussion. Actually, when you speak to people, a lot of them it's just against or in favor, you know. But when you ask people, well, have you thought if you want a federal government or a central government, or do you want a presidential system, you know, or a parliamentary system like most European countries have, and how do you want to structure the territory and all that? And they all go like, nah, I haven't really thought about that one. You know, it's like, well, that's pretty important if you're going to write a new constitution, you know?
Yeah, it's very complicated because obviously, you know, political structures have their history. It sounds very plain to say, but if you've never been involved in politics, or the kind of level of, I suppose, compromise that should exist in politics between people of either side, to involve all of a sudden all of these people based on a sort of non-meritocracy, i.e. we're going to fill this because based on all these percentages, and with people who don't really maybe understand how politics works. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because maybe there's another system that can come out of it to replace a corrupt system. But also there's checks and balances that exist, because nobody really wants either further side of the argument to be in power. You know, you reach compromise in the middle, but in a really weird way, in this sort of weird polarized world that we're in, chasing equity all the time sometimes leads to chaos. Does that make any sense?
Maybe I don't know. Well, there's still going to be a vote. You know, there's going to be elections, and recent polls have showed that most people actually do want representatives with knowledge of constitutional law. They just don't want their whatever, the neighborhood leader or whatever, you know. I mean, some people do, some people don't. It's gonna be a very motley mix of people in there, you know. Maybe it's good or not. But the one thing that I still think, and it's probably not very popular that I say it, but one of the things that led to the crisis that we had last year in this country was probably that people didn't go to vote. You know, the last president was elected with 50% of less than 50% of the whole population entitled to vote. You know, and I think that is something that is very, by now in this younger generation, is deeply rooted. That it doesn't matter if I vote or not, you know, because they're still going to be in power anyway, and they're going to do the same thing always. And B, now that we have the chance, I sort of have the impression that a lot of people are like, oh, someone will fix it, you know, someone will magically fix it, you know, it's going to be all right, you know, we won the referendum, so everything else is going to be easy, you know. And it's not, it's going to be very complicated, you know. But as you say, do you leave the complicated to people who understand the complicated, or do you leave the complicated to everyone, you know? It's
like in Irish politics, they move different representatives to different sort of sections of the government, and so you might get an entire backbench with not a single economist on it, or somebody who's in charge of arts and tourism who has no concept of the arts, or you know, like people, they just move.
Same thing happens here. Same thing happens here. Absolutely, man. It's just cronies, you know. It's just the president's friends and whoever, you know, cousins and whatever. They're all in the government, you know, and they don't really know what to do. And you know, it's just ridiculous.
Did you visit Europe in the 90s, or did I get that wrong?
I
visited before you emigrated, like.
Yes. I visited Europe for the first time in the 80s, in 83 actually.
Wow, really? Okay.
I went with my parents, and I came back with a bag full of vinyls, including black metal and Kill 'Em All and Melissa and so on and so on. You know, so that was
Okay, right.
It was great. I was too young to go to shows. I remember seeing posters for the Iron Maiden World Peace Tour
Yeah.
and Motorhead Another Perfect Day.
Oh, yeah,
But I
right.
couldn't go to either of them because I was too small still, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yeah, but that was the first time, very lucky. Then I went again in, hang on, 91.
Okay.
Just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, actually.
Okay.
And I went to visit Eastern Germany shortly after the wall fell. It was very
Okay.
interesting to see the contrast, you know.
Yeah. So,
I actually went because we thought that my grandfather could have a bank account there with some money in it,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know. So we went there, but the fees and everything had eaten whatever ever was on that bank account, so
Sure.
nothing came out of it, you know. But it was a very interesting experience, and you could see the difference, you know, and the how modern the infrastructure was in the West and how run down and shitty it was in the East, the pollution in the East, you know, and everything. The people for some reason equate capitalism with pollution,
Mm,
but socialism isn't much better. It's
yeah.
not worse, you know. So
Well,
I'm not a fan of either. I don't want people to get the idea that I'm some raging right-wing Trumpite or something like that, you know.
I
But
don't think I don't think anybody's gonna gonna think that. Yeah, I mean, in industry back then, and you know, it was based on. I mean, I'm pretty sure, as you say, the checks and balances on whether things pollute or not were not really part of the equation. But that must have been a really fascinating trip. Then, let's say in '91, when you were old enough to really observe the difference. What were the fundamental differences then between South American society then what you came to and saw? Like, was there any things that really struck you as being very different, even in the people or something? You know, I'm always fascinated by that.
Well, the first thing that strikes you is just the standard of living, you know,
Yeah,
you know, how the cities look, how the houses look, how the trains look, how the public transport in general looks, you know, all
yeah,
that was very um, very it was a very stark contrast to what you saw in South America, definitely, you know. Whereas I've always had a problem because I lived in Germany for a few years, you know, and I definitely have a problem with the German mentality. And I know I'm from a strictly genetic point of view, I'm probably 100% German,
yeah, yeah,
but I grew up as a South American, so I have a problem with that rigidness, you know, that sort of everything is constricted and there's got to be rules and regulations for everything, from sweeping your fucking stairs to whatever, you know, where you put your trash and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah.
And that was very overwhelming for me when I went to Germany. And I like the looseness, you know, of the Latino life. Maybe not too much, you
Yeah.
know, but perhaps that's why I'm living in Spain or Basque country rather now, because that's, for me, is a nice compromise of people who get the job done, but at the same time they don't work to live, but rather other way around. They don't live to work, but they rather work to live, you know, which
Yeah.
is very important to me.
Yeah, that's
Well, and to finish answering to your question,
yeah,
I went for the last time to Europe in '99, which was already sort of an exploration to see if we could actually do that. I was married back then, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
I went with my wife, you know, and we went to a few festivals. We went to, I think it was the last Dynamo Festival in '99.
Oh,
So
okay,
where
I was there. Yeah, yeah.
Metallica were headlining, I think, and
Yeah, yeah.
Merciful Fate played, you know, and
Manowar, yeah, yeah.
yeah, and we visited a few cities, you know, and yeah, we liked it and said, well, why not? You know, I at that time I felt pretty stuck in Chile. I thought that we throughout the '90s, Criminal did really well down here. You know, we did
Yeah,
very big shows. We've sold a lot of records, but at some point it just started to stall. You know, and that's when also the whole record industry crisis started happening, you know, Napster and all that, and people were just downloading shit for free, you know, and
yeah,
no one bought CDs anymore, especially in South America, I guess even more
yeah, yeah.
than the first world, you know. So I kind of thought, well, there's not much more to do here, so I'd rather just go and start anew. And I didn't really have a plan, you know. I started playing with some people when I got to the UK. I actually played a tour as a member of Extreme Noise Terror. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah. There you go. Wow.
That was that was my baptism of fire in fucking Europe. Playing with Dean Jones. Yeah, that was a good one. But then I started Criminal again, but it was sort of a different thing, you know, and it never kind of took off really. And we still kept making albums and stuff. And then towards the end of the first decade of the 2000s, I decided to reform Pentagram.
Yeah.
And shortly after, I got the call from Shane to be in lockup, you know, and then a few years later, they asked me to join Brujeria. So and I was doing pretty well before the whole fucking pandemic started, you know?
Yeah. I mean, tell me about it. It's the idea that now we're corralled into being content creators. I mean, you know, it's a week or two after it started in March, I went, right, I need to do a podcast too, otherwise I'll go insane. I need to have some creative outlet. And thankfully it grows and grows. But at the end of the day, here we are sitting talking on Zoom when we used to, you know, we did a tour together playing One of the Gods, and you're removed to, I don't know, it's very hard to not dwell on, I suppose, to come round to where we were at the beginning, to not kind of think, I don't know if things will be the same as they were again. Are we going to be allowed, is it going to be allowed to be as it was? I mean, that's a very, you know, who knows, but what I've been trying to tell myself is that I've been trying to hold the line between either side of the debate and try and rationally observe things. But I totally understand that, and I think we all do. We're all kind of played by our algorithm to stand in a certain, just even an inch to the left can view what's happening in a different way. And my own sort of pessimism, because I was a bit of a pessimist anyway, is amplified by my situation and also within that algorithm. So I have friends who just say, like, you know, Kieran and Primordial just go, look, it'll be grand. There'll be shows. Stop stressing. That's just, and he can just go, woof. It's a brilliant skill to be able to just concentrate on the matters in hand, whereas I have no off switch to not think about, well, what about this, and this, you know?
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I'm optimistic. As a matter of fact, Criminal just got confirmed for Wacken.
Wow, okay.
On Sunday, you know, which is something to look forward to, you know, and I hope it happens. And I think, well, maybe it won't happen. Maybe it will happen the year after. But I think this is not a situation that can go on indefinitely. Yeah. Because people won't take it in the end. I mean, if and even if the vaccines don't work the way they're supposed to, in the end, people are going to say, well, we're not going to live our lives like this, you know. We're just going to go out again. We're just going to start living. And dude, it's fucking Darwin. Sorry.
Yeah. I kind of feel the same thing. I mean, personally, again, I think that, you know, power begets more power. And people say to me, yeah, but why would, you know, when we're arguing hypothetical, somebody would say to me, but why would they need, or what's in it for them? You know, for somebody listening on the podcast, I'm doing parenthesis, little rabbit ears. But the idea that enough power is enough for anyone who has power is a naive estimation of power, you know?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. There's never enough.
No. So
there's never enough, because power, I think people who crave power, it's not only for the power itself or the money that comes with it, but it's also a very personal experience, you know, to that lifts them up, you know, to be above other people, you know, and that must be a very addictive feeling. Everybody, I mean, we see it with a few of our peers, you know, that think that being a musician in a metal band is somehow some kind of status that puts them above other people. You know, so there is that personality trait in some people, and if the power is real power, like real power, you have the power to kill people or to evict them from their homes or stuff like that, then it must be quite addictive, I guess, you know.
Sort of sociopathic narcissism or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the plans now? Are you going to be able to get back to Europe, or what's going on?
I guess I will. I've already been traveling back and forth, but only because I hold 2 passports. I have a Chilean passport and a German passport. So I need the German passport to enter into Europe, and I need the Chilean to enter Chile, which I've managed to do. So I don't see a problem there. But yeah, more importantly, what's going to happen now? Well, I've been very busy writing music. I'm finishing the vocals, and we're finishing the lead guitars also on a new Criminal album. The new Brujeria album is pretty much recorded. Also, vocals have been recorded, which is the last thing that we still need to do. We recorded a whole, I wrote most of it, and we recorded a whole new Lockup album in lockdown, unintended.
Lock up and lock down, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which is turning out great. There's still a few things, there's bass still to be recorded. So, and started work on a new Pentagram album, but that's only in the writing stage right now. So we're working on that now. So a lot of music coming next year, you know, and then just waiting to hopefully get the chance to go out and promote it with live shows before we're all too old. That's the thing. I feel like I've been robbed of a year of my life, you know, because if this had happened when I was 23 or 24, I would okay, whatever, you know. I've got plenty of time, you know, but now I don't have plenty of time. The clock is ticking, motherfucker.
Yeah, so. No, you're totally right. I feel the same thing. I feel totally like it's almost like somebody has like an enforced pause on my life, and whether it comes back to the same degree as it did remains to be seen. But at the same time, I'm like you. I'm like, hey, come on, you know, that we're moving through middle age pretty bloody quickly. As you say, if this had happened when I was 24 and I was just sharing a house with other idiots and somebody said, you can't do a thing for your, I'd go, whatever, you know.
You just go drunk and do drugs for a whole year. And then when you wake up, all of a sudden, it's all back to normal.
Yeah. So I've one last question for you. I often hear this phrase, and I want to know what is the South American saudade?
Saudade. That's it's a Portuguese word, so I don't know exactly what it means. I think it literally means health, but in colloquial language it means more than that. I think it means like to know how to live your life, to enjoy your life, you know. I think it's something like that. I
was hoping for a better answer.
Well,
I thought it was like I thought it was, I thought about it there because I was thinking about it because we have this word ennui. It's like a sort of existential sadness.
All right.
And
okay. I see a lot of that in Chile. You know, I think there's a lot of doom bands coming out of Chile, and I think and you know there's big poets like Pablo Neruda. Pablo de Roca came out of Chile, and they all have like this inherent sadness to them, you know.
Because I was there last April, and I certainly felt Chile was different from the other South American countries that I was in. It had
I think
very different.
Part of it is probably part of it is just because the climate is a bit colder. You know, it's more gray and it's not so tropical and whatever. You know, so. Chile, Argentina, or Uruguay are probably more like a bit different, a bit more European, perhaps, you know. But that's all I can say about it, really. I mean, people still know how to party in this part of the world, and you probably know that too.
Yes, I do know that. It feels like Irish people have forgotten, to be honest with you, you know.
Oh, really? Oh,
that's not forgotten. There's a very strange feeling here. It's like a sort of there's a sort of kind of resigned sort of sadness to proceedings in life here at the moment, as if people are just and also very kind of local parochialism where, again, you try and say to somebody something about liberty, freedom. You know, Irish people like to lean into liberty and freedom, as you know, after a few drinks or something like this. And then now when you say, yeah, but, you know, what about all the things that are in all the songs you sing when you've had a few beers now? You know, it's as if we can't quite grasp both points of view at the same time. I don't know.
Idealism is one thing, but then the reality is very different.
I don't know. Well, my friend, it's been a pleasure. It's been Anton from Criminal, Pentagram, and all the things that you've heard. and this is Agitators Anonymous.